Welcome, Peter Roper, to today's Chewing the Cud.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and thank you for those attending. This has been an interesting project for me because people quite often share or offer to loan me information that they have about Express Dairy and its related companies. There are all sorts of different forms in which that happens. This particular topic that I'm talking about this afternoon was again Ruyton in a small creamery in Shropshire. I already had quite a lot of material about it. I think I've got 270 images and stories about the creamery already. And they offered me this rusty steel box full of documents. This is from the farm where the creamery originally started. I've had them for several months because it's quite a lot of work to go through them all. And out of that have come 350 properly documented images about what happened when in the dairy and how it started. So that's how we got to the topic of today's session. Ruyton 11 Towns, I'll explain the strange name in a minute, is just northwest of Shrewsbury. You can see on the map here. And the farm where it all started is right in the centre of the village, called at this time Ruyton of the 11 Towns. This is an old map. The original farm was where the red circle is, and the creamery they eventually established was just literally 100 yards up the road. So the village itself has got quite an old history. It was actually granted a royal charter by King Edward II in 1308. And the reason for its strange name is that there were 11 little towns, although I don't think we'd even call them towns, villages, or barely that even. They're listed here on the slide. One interesting little snippet there is was in 1878, Arthur Conan Doyle was living in the village as a medical assistant, and he described rather aptly Ruyton as being a small townlet in Shropshire which rejoiced in the extraordinary name of Ruyton of the 11 Towns. And as he says, it's not big enough for one town, far less 11. And the nearest most recent population I could find was only 1,379 people. So I think you probably argue the same still applies. But there we are, Ruyton 11 Towns it is. And interestingly, the company was founded by William Howe Gittings. This is the grandfather of the people who loaned me this information in 1918. And one of the things that surprised me a bit was, in fact, the armistice wasn't signed for the First World War until November 1918, yet the company was formed in June. I don't know whether this was a general thing or not, whether people realised the war was coming to an end and wanted to invest in new things, but it did strike me as a bit strange. But as was normal with these things, the Articles of Association was couched in very wide terms, as you can see here. So they could do virtually anything that related to food of any type, I think, or being colour merchants, chemists, or druggists, carmen and carriers as well. So I think this is actually fairly typical of the era and probably still now, but interesting that such a wide objective was started. In 1922, they formed a public limited company, and the directors of the company were all local farmers. And in fact, the names that you're seeing here, Lloyd, Suckley, Timmis, Slater, etc., the families are still farming in the same area today. So obviously this is quite interesting for those families as well. The shareholders too were nearly all local farmers. So we see a share certificate for Mr. William Alfred Tutton. I think he actually was the company secretary. And there were £1 shares, initially £10,000, and then later on it was increased to 13,800. But although that doesn't sound very much, in fact, at today's prices, that's equivalent to £735,000. So, £750,000. So this wasn't a small enterprise by any means. The shareholders then, here's an example, the list on the left, one of the things that I scanned, and you can see there on the left column here, the occupation, nearly all farmers, farmer, miller and farmer, general dealer, and many of them only had the minimum number of shares, which were £10 shares. Mr. Gittins, who started it, though he had the biggest shareholding, over £1,000. So what we're seeing here is that the creamery was a very important part of this community and of the farming enterprise nearby. It wasn't a trivial thing at all. It was very important to what they wanted to achieve. They expanded straight away. In 1928, they bought another creamery at a nearby town called Whittington, just a few miles up the road. Even more importantly, they acquired a Birmingham dairy that had two sites. Very importantly, gave an outlet for liquid milk, because throughout the history of dairying, liquid milk has always achieved a higher price than milk for manufacture or cheese making. And that still applies today as well. So this gave them an opportunity to sell liquid milk at a higher price and for it not to all go into cheese. Although cheese making was a useful way, if you like, of storing milk, it wasn't without disadvantages, because obviously if you were making cheese, the cheese went into store, went to mature. It may have taken a year or so before it was sold, and all the money that was paid for the milk was then tied up in stock, which had to stay there, and there were costs of running the cheese stores as well. Just make a note as well, this was Cheshire cheese that was produced at this time. It wasn't cheddar. Cheddar came later, but this was Cheshire, and that was common for many of the creameries in the middle part of England at that time. The idyllic cottage on the left here was actually demolished for the new creamery to be built. So probably we wouldn't have done that this day, but there you are, that was what was demolished, and the new creamery was put in its place. But as you can see from the right-hand picture, this was a fairly agricultural looking enterprise. There's nothing high-tech here at all, is it? A collection of old buildings with perhaps one or two new ones, some milk churns in the background on a cart, but nothing too exciting. This picture is actually from the 1940s, we believe. The company also acquired property in the village and surroundings. Some cottages and houses were rented out to employees, others were rented out to whoever wanted to live in them. And this letter's quite interesting, dated September 1922. The company was allowed to deduct 3 shillings a week from Mr. Butler, William Butler's wages in lieu of rent. So he was an employee at the dairy at the time. Lots of complications arose, as you might expect from an enterprise of this size. And this is a handwritten schedule from the Motor Union Insurance Company. And it's just a reminder of the days when insurance policies, and in fact all business transactions, were handwritten. There were agents that used to travel around to different places, write down the policies, premiums and such like. And this document's also interesting because it gives a little bit of an idea of how many people were employed and what they did. They had to have a license to keep petroleum, and they had a Chevrolet and a Daimler lorry that they used for carting milk around. Transport costs were always very important, and this is a few checkbook stubs that I've scanned. Note the one on here for the Great Western Railway. This is just a month's carriage, £670. That's an enormous amount of money for that time, 1932. Tens of thousands of pounds in today's value, and other smaller costs as well. Occasionally, the vehicles were involved in accidents. This is rather interesting, perhaps slightly amusing letter from a local veterinary surgeon who examined a crossbred bullock who'd been injured with a collision with one of the dairy's vehicles, and in turn this was referred on to the Motor Union Insurance Company to be settled. Also, you couldn't buy very much specialist equipment at this time, so they needed a cheese press in order to make hard cheese. Cheese is put in usually into a metal mold and then pressed under great pressure. And this is a cheese press drawing, and this was commissioned by the dairy, and the work was carried out by W.H. Smith & Co., not the one that you're thinking of, but a local iron and steel manufacturing organisation in the local village. So they made the cheese presses and other similar equipment. This is a fascinating part of the archive because in 1930, the company advertised in the Farmer and Stockbreeder magazine for a post of cheesemaker. And at this time, dairy training and qualifications were well advanced, and there were many colleges and universities who offered training in dairy science and similar. And one thing I think particularly fascinating is that many of the applications, I've probably got 20 or more here for this particular post, were from female college students, because for females at that time, single females in particular, dairying was a very respectable profession and well thought of as well. So a lot of girls came from farms. This is a letter from Gwen Williams, who describes herself as a farmer's daughter and fully qualified dairymaid. She'd got a national diploma in dairying from Reading. Here's another one, Phyllis Barlow. She was 25 years old, just finished 3 terms at Cheshire Dairy College. And many of the colleges and universities that applications were received from in 1930s are still in existence today, including my own university. I went to Nottingham, to Sutton Bonington, which interestingly enough, only in the last few weeks, you may have seen in the press, have announced they're discontinuing all their agriculture and dairying courses. So here's a reference letter from the University College of Wales in Aberystwyth. Obviously, there were quite a few Welsh applicants, because we were talking here, Ruyton is just literally 5 or 10 miles from the Welsh border. So Miss Emily Jones had done 2 years at the University College of Wales and worked at 3 different local creameries as well. So what we're seeing here is the importance of the dairy sector as an employer and giving opportunities for women as well as men. Just a bit more on the financial side now. This is a balance sheet from 1920, and the total value of the business at that time was not far short of £1 million at today's prices, and quite significant. The income of £2,300 was £121,000 at today's prices. Obviously, buying the milk was the biggest expense, but interestingly enough, buying coals for the boilers was also another big expense. So I guess people were concerned about energy costs even then. And here we've got a look at the Ruyton boiler men looking very happy with their coal-fired steam boiler. Now we're moving into the 1930s, and obviously economic conditions in the country were very poor at that time. But specifically, there were low milk and cheese prices, and although the company's asset value appreciated a lot, in the end of the 30s to £2.5 million, the uncertainty of milk pricing and such like was beginning to become more and more important. But nevertheless, the company at this point was a very substantial and successful company. Every month, the directors had a meeting to discuss milk prices for the previous month, and that was based obviously on how much was supplied, what the demand was like, and what the quality of milk was like. And there were lots of discussions about how to manage the irregularity of supplies, because in the spring and summer months there's much more natural grass, yields of cows go up, but then of course the price goes down. I did a graph of the milk prices that were being offered, and the purple line here shows the serious decline in milk prices towards the end of 1932 and 1933. And this was well below the cost of production. So milk was being sold by farms at a loss at this time. And even the government became concerned about this, because not only were they no doubt concerned by the farmers' lobbying, but also there was concern about the supply of milk being guaranteed for consumers as well. And various things led on from that. In 1930, the National Farmers Union threatened a milk strike involving withholding milk supplies in order to try to persuade the government to have some better system for milk pricing. And in fact, at this meeting on the document on the left in 1932, Ruyton Dairies agreed to withhold milk from the market to support this strike. However, it backfired on them because, unfortunately, as Mr. Gittings reported here, while we were withholding the sale of our milk, others were selling. And once a settlement was made, many buyers had already bought their requirements. As he says, we're today reaping the reward of our folly, which has taught us a lesson we shall not soon forget. So it wasn't all plain sailing. The company was fortunate, though, because a lot of the milk went from Baschurch Station just down the road to Paddington on the Great Western Railway. And Ruyton Co-operative Dairies were very lucky because they had important contracts for supplying milk in London. And that included Guy's, Hammersmith, and West Middlesex hospitals, which are going today. They needed to employ someone in London to collect the milk and take it to the customers in London. And here we are. Here's a letter of contracts with J. Williams and Son, pure milk specialists trading as West Kensington Creameries. And they would pick up the milk from Paddington Station in these conical 17-gallon churns that were in use at that time. The cylindrical 10-gallon churns didn't come until later, and then haul them to the hospital customers in West London. There was concern by the railways at this time as well, because the railways were saying that they were losing revenue to road transport. So this trend, which obviously continued later, had just started at that time. And they complained that the laws regulating road transport were not being enforced, like speed limits, hours of duty, and such like, and that there should be a higher tax regimen on road transport. And in fact, they were listened to, because in 1933 there was the Road and Rail Traffic Act, which set out a licensing system for hauliers as well. So the railways, having taken over from the canals, were now beginning to feel the pressure from the roads, and they didn't like it. The government was concerned generally about the whole issue of milk marketing in England and Wales, and there'd been various proposals, none of which were successful. But a new scheme was developed, a permanent joint committee set up in 1933, where the idea was to have common pricing for all milk, no matter where it went to, whether it was going for cheese to manufacture or for liquid, and the concept of the farmers, through their milk price, making a contribution to milk publicity costs to allow the dairy industry to try to expand its sales volumes. And ultimately, that led to the setting up of the Milk Marketing Board in 1933. And once that had happened, anybody with more than 6 cows had to sell their milk to the board. So what that meant, in effect, was that the whole purpose of Ruyton Co-operative Dairies really diminished then, because now they were operating a creamery, but they didn't really have any control over the pricing or the purchasing of the milk any longer. So what then happened in 1936 was that Kraft Foods, American company, took over their creamery in Ruyton and also the one at Whittington. And here's a charming picture from the 1930s of the creamery staff all lined up and very proud of their jobs and everything else. Because this, if we look at the next slide as well, these were sort of a family affair. Nearly everyone would work at the creamery, and they were a major employer. Even the dog, it seems, was an employer that. And it was a golden period, if you like, for these rural economies. In 1954, Express Dairy acquired both the creameries. I remember at this time milk was still arriving in churns. There were over 600 farmers supplying milk. As far as Express was concerned, though, they already operated 15 creameries throughout the UK. So to them, it was a logical expansion. And there was a lot of other acquisitions made by the company at this time. Wasn't all plain sailing, though, because the creamery was blamed for extending their borehole and running the village dry of water, because like a lot of rural villages, there was no pipe water supply at that time, and the village drew all its water from wells. And in fact, the dairy had to supply water to the village residents in churns from a bowser because there wasn't enough to go around. The sort of concept of a family company was still very much existing in the 1960s, and social functions. So this was, I guess, the late Christmas dairy party held in Shrewsbury in 1960. and everyone's there in their finery and ladies in their lovely dresses and things. And this was very much a part of life, not only at this creamery, but all the ones that I've been documenting. Back in the factory, we're seeing a little bit more automation here. The local people would all be known to each other. They were all members of the same family and it remained a very important local employer. But very much the rural idyll here. The cows, the creamery nestling in the green Shropshire fields. Nothing was going to disturb that really. This was a continuation of what started after the First World War and was still carrying on even in the early 1960s. But later on, it became more industrialized. There was big new investment in the 1970s. Automatic cheddar equipment was installed, and interesting as well, a spray dryer for processing the whey powder. Because whey, which is the liquid that comes out of the cheese during manufacture when it's been pressed, that was regarded as a waste product right up to this time. It wasn't until a dryer was installed that it was used then as now for food manufacture as ingredients. So as it was a waste product, most creameries, including this one, had a pig farm attached to it. In the case of Ruyton, there was a pipeline that went directly from the creamery down to the piggery so the pigs could eat the whey, or drink it, I should say. This is an actual figure of a picture from another express creamery at Holywood near Dumfries in 1961. So still very much happening in the 60s. Later on, much more automation. We're in the 1980s now, highly automated cheese packing area, a dryer control room. Still not everything was smooth. All the local residents were complaining about unpleasant odours from the creamery's effluent plants, and this actually was a feature in nearly all the creameries at that time. People obviously didn't want smells coming from the effluent plants, and Express and other dairy companies had to build their own effluent plants. And there was a bit of a conflict here because the local residents wanted the smell sorted out, whereas Express were at the same time trying to sort out their commitments to meet statutory requirements for river pollution. Moving on a bit further, we see milk, of course, arriving by tanker, automatic cheese making equipment, and extensive whey storage and processing stainless steel vessels here. So all still looking good, but 1993, the end of an era, as the local paper announced. From 1918 to 1993, there was 75 years of continuous cheese making and 213 people's jobs were affected. And as it says, stunned staff facing the creamery bombshell, probably a little bit of license by the headline writer there, but it was a significant event. And many people in the village who'd had secure employment didn't have it anymore. So it wasn't quite the end, though, because I visited the site a couple of years ago. It's now a base for a transport company, but unbelievably, it's still used as a cheese store. And you can see the crates of cheese. These are photos that I took. And there are millions of pounds of cheese in these same buildings that were erected then, still in store there. Just to say in conclusion, huge thanks to Kate Main and the Gittins family at Hall Farm, Ruyton, who loaned this fascinating material. The rusty steel box is on the left there. And when I gave it back to them, everything was all sorted, all the metal staples were removed and replaced with plastic clips. Everything was documented, put in envelopes and categorized, over 20 categories. And as I mentioned earlier, there's over 350 documents. The whole of the archive is on my website, expressdairytales.uk. If you are interested, there's a link here to a cheese making video which shows how cheese was made in the period we're talking about. And I hope you found it a little bit interesting. Thank you.